Grade 8, today we will do The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Now this is a story with a moral, but it's quite picturesquely written. I am again not going to read word for word. It's the story of a selfish giant. He had a beautiful garden, but he built a high wall around his garden to stop the children from coming in. Let's read. It's going to be probably an abridged, a shortened version, which means that you will miss the beauty of the language that Mr. Wilde was capable of. These stories are abridged because it is believed that you don't have the focus or the ability to read the original. All these stories are available on Amazon. And it's a different thing to read a story written by an expert writer than it is to read it after it's been chopped a little. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden. There were beautiful flowers that looked like stars, 12 peach trees that bore fruit in the autumn, in the fall season. The birds sang sweetly, and the children so sweetly that the children used to listen to them. "How happy we are here," they said. The giant had not been here, that's why they were enjoying his garden. But one day he came back from his 7-year visit to his friend, the Cornish ogre. Cornwall is a place in the United Kingdom in England. When he arrived, he saw the children playing. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very rough and angry voice, and the children ran away. As you see on the next page, the illustration, which in my personal opinion does no justice to the power of my own imagination. I imagine it much more exciting and interesting than that. However, reading on, "My own garden is my own garden," he said. "Anyone can understand it, and nobody can play here except myself." So he built a little high wall around it and put up a notice board: "Trespassers will be prosecuted." People who are walking on places that don't belong to them are called trespassers in the United Kingdom, trespassers in India, prosecuted, taken to court, punished by law. He was a very selfish giant. The poor children now had nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but it was dusty and full of stones. They wandered around the high walls when their studies were over and talked about the garden inside, how happy we were there. Then it was springtime after winter, and the little blossoms, the tiny buds and little birds began to come out everywhere, except in the garden of the selfish giant, where it was still winter. The birds did not want to sing there because there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. They forgot to put out flowers. Once a beautiful flower did put its head out, but when it saw the notice board, it felt so bad for the children that it slipped right back into the ground and went off to sleep. It's a fable, it's a moral tale, it's a tale full of imagination. The only people who were happy were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried. Here, to cry means to say loudly. "We can live here all year round." The snow covered the grass with her great white cloak, a coat, and the frost painted all the trees silver. That's a beautiful line. The snow had a coat that it threw over the grass, and the frost took a paintbrush and made all the trees silver and cold with ice and frost. Then they invited the north wind to come. He was wrapped in furs because he's the north wind, so cold, and he roared all day in the garden and blew the chimney pots down. So he blew so hard that the chimney pots fell down. "This is a delightful spot. This is a delightful place. We must ask Hail to visit." Hail is all those little round stones of ice that fall when it's cold. So the hail came and fell for 3 hours on the roof of the castle of the giant, broke most of the slate stone on the roof, and ran round and round the garden. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. Now the giant goes, "I can't understand why the spring is so late in coming. as he looked out at his cold white garden. When will the weather change? But spring never came, nor did the summer. The autumn gave fruit everywhere, but without flowers there's going to be no fruit. So in the giant's garden there was nothing. He's too selfish, she said, the autumn. It was just winter there. North wind and hail and frost and snow danced about. One morning the giant was lying in his bed and he heard some lovely music. He thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. But it was only a little linnet, a brown songbird, singing outside. To him it sounded wonderful because he hadn't heard a bird singing for so long. The hail stopped, the north wind ceased. To cease means to stop, C-E-A-S-E. And a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement window. Spring has come, he thought, and jumped out of bed to look outside. Let's do the comprehension check. Why is the giant called selfish? Present tense. The giant is called selfish because he does not want to share his garden with anyone. On one occasion, the children said how happy we are here, and later they said how happy we were there. What are they referring to in both cases? What are they referring to? Present tense. In both cases, they are referring to the time they spent in the giant's beautiful garden. Question 3. When spring came, it was still winter in the garden. What does winter stand for or indicate means show? Winter stands for a time of silence, loneliness, and sorrow here. Winter has been presented like a story with its own characters and activities. Describe the story in your own words. In the story of winter, the actors are hail that battered the roof, the north wind dressed in furs, blowing and roaring all over the garden, the snow throwing its coat over the grass, and the frost painting everything icy white. Did I forget any of the characters? You can write a line about those. What effect did 4. Was the giant happy or sad over the state of the garden? Was, past tense, the giant was sad to see that spring had not come to his garden. What effect did the linnet song have over the hail and the north wind? The bird's song chased away the hail, or hail because we're calling it like a name, and the north wind. Let's read on. So when the giant looked out of his window, he saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in, past tense of to creep, crawl in silently. And they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree there was a little child. And the trees were so happy to have the children that they covered themselves with blossoms, flowers, waved their arms, their branches above the children's heads. Another picture that does no justice to the power of my imagination, but perhaps it will help you. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight. Flowers were looking up and laughing. It was a lovely scene. When the children come, apparently then comes all the happiness. Only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner, the one furthest away from the castle. In it was a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach up. And he was wandering around the tree. He couldn't reach up to the branches of the tree, crying bitterly, extremely sadly. That poor tree was covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was still blowing around it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches as low as it could to try and help the boy. But the boy was too tiny. And when the selfish giant saw this little boy trying to climb up a tree but it can't, and crying, the giant's heart melted. He had a change of heart. How selfish I have been, he said. Now I know why spring wouldn't come here. I'm going to put that boy on top of the tree and knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs to crept, opened the front door softly and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were frightened, scared, afraid, and ran away. And immediately winter came back to the garden. Again, this is a fairy or a story, a fable. So there's imagination there. As the children left, winter came back. All the children ran away, but the little boy didn't run because his eyes were so full of tears he didn't see the giant. And the giant stole up behind him. To steal up behind someone means to creep up behind them, not to steal something from them. To steal a watch means to take it away, but to steal up quietly behind someone means to creep up behind them. The giant took him gently in his hands and put him up into the tree. And at once the tree became green and full of flowers, and the birds came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched his two arms, flung them, threw them around the giant's neck, and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back. And with them came the spring. "It's your garden," said the giant. He took a great axe and broke down the wall. And when people were going out at noon, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they'd ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to bid him goodbye. Is an old-fashioned way of saying to say goodbye to him. "But where's your little companion?" he said, "the boy I put into the tree." The giant loved him the best because that little boy had kissed him. I guess this grumpy old giant just needed a little love too. "We don't know. He's gone away," said the children. "We'll tell him to come tomorrow." But the children said they did not know where he lived and had never seen him before. The giant was sad. Every afternoon the children came and played, but the little boy never came again. The giant was kind to everyone, but he longed for his first friend who had been so affectionate to him. How I would like to see him. Years went by and the giant grew old and feeble. Feeble means weak. He could not play any more, so he sat, here he is, sitting in a huge armchair, and watched the children at their games, and admired. To admire means to look with pleasure and wonder at his own garden. "So many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the most beautiful are the children. They are the beautiful flowers. They are the most beautiful flowers." One winter morning he looked out of his window. It's winter again. As he was dressing, he did not hate the winter now because he knew that spring will come again. Spring was just asleep and the flowers were resting. But then he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. In the farthest corner, there was a tree covered with lovely white blossoms, white flowers. Branches were golden and silver fruit hung down, some kind of magical tree. And underneath it stood the boy he had loved. Finally, he sees the little boy again, after so many years when he's extremely old. He ran down in great joy and hastened across the grass. To hasten means to hurry. He hurried across the grass, and then he came near the child. Then he became angry. Why? Because he saw that on the hands of the child were the prints of 2 nails, and there were 2 nails on the little feet, as if the nails had been put through his hands and his feet. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" Old English. "Who has dared to hurt you?" he cried. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him. Tell me, so that I can pick up my sword and kill him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "No," said the child, These injuries are made by love. Who art thou? Who are you? Said the giant, and a strange awe, an unusual wonder fell on him. It's not a real thing that fell on him like a brick. It came over him, a feeling of awe and wonder. And then he knelt before the child. Why did he kneel down? To kneel? Knelt. Because he recognized something spiritual or bigger than himself. It was not a little child in front of him. And the child smiled at the giant and said, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. Now here, those nail marks on the hands and the feet should remind us of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Jesus, Oscar Wilde is a Christian, Jesus was nailed to a cross by his hands and his feet. And he was willing to be nailed because he believed that his pain would clean away the wrongs of all the people. If I am mean and selfish, by Jesus suffering for my weakness, I become stronger. That's why the giant also recognized that this little boy was God. And that's why the child says, "Come and play in my garden now," which is paradise, heaven. So the point is that a little boy, God, and his love can make a person who is selfish become kind. So God's love can change our bad characteristics into good ones. The giant saw a most wonderful sight. What did he see? That was past tense, the question. I believe this wonderful sight was the giant saw a tree covered with white flowers. It had golden branches and silver fruit. And the boy that he had loved stood beneath it. What did he realize on seeing it? He realized that spring had come, or that there was his little friend had come back to see him. Wait, children, these are the wrong answers, because here the other wonderful sight is happening. Here's the wonderful sight that he saw. This story is full of wonderful sights. Let's do it again. The wonderful sight that the giant saw was the children in the garden who had crept in through a hole. Along with the children had crept in through a hole in the wall, full stop. Along with the children, spring had come to the garden. Trees were blossoming and birds were singing everywhere. What did he realize when he saw it? What did he realize when this wonderful sight? The giant realized that spring had come to the garden. Now we go to question 2. Why was it still winter in one corner of the garden? It was still winter in one corner of the garden because no child was playing there. The first meeting of the little boy and the giant, let's describe it. When the giant first saw the little boy, he was standing beneath the tree crying sadly. He was too small to climb up it, and so the tree was covered in frost. On seeing this tiny boy crying, the giant's heart melted. He realized he had been very selfish. He crept downstairs quietly to the little boy, picked him up and put him in the tree. At once the tree began to blossom and the birds came to sit in it. The little boy was so happy that he put his arms around the giant and kissed him. This was the first meeting. Describe their second meeting. The next time the giant saw the little boy, he noticed that he was injured on his hands and feet. At first he was angry and wanted to know who had hurt him. But when the boy said that he was hurt by love, the giant realized that the boy was God. The little boy took the giant to paradise, and the giant was found dead, covered in white flowers when the children came to play. Now the last one. The giant lay dead, all covered with white blossoms. What does this sentence indicate? What does this show about the once selfish giant? The white blossoms show, according to me, God's forgiveness toward the giant. They also show that he had become beautiful inside when he stopped being selfish. Okay. Now the exercise discussed the following. I've already told you the first one, hands and feet marks of nail, is symbolic of the crucifixion of Christ. Is there something like this garden near where you live? Well, we are extremely lucky. The whole of the place where we live is like this garden. What would you do to keep it in good shape? Well, I have been going for my walks and see the garbage piling up everywhere. I don't think we care enough to keep it in good shape. Then at the bottom we have, think it over. Selfless love involves suffering for others. Owning things is human, sharing them is divine. You may use these as your thought for the day in assembly if you like. If you have any more questions still, please ask me in class.